In this video, we're going to take a look at declaring and working with dictionaries. Now, dictionaries are unique to lists because they're associated by key value pair. That means that basically with a list, we just shove a bunch of objects in it and we sort through it. With a dictionary, you associate objects with or values with a key value pair. So for example, let's take a look at declaring it with an item class. I'm going to define the item class. And let's say every item here is going to have a name and an ID. Once we've done that, I'm going to add an attribute so that we can see this in the inspector and using system.serializable. So here's the item class. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new C# class that's going to host the item database, and we'll create a list of items, and then we'll look at creating a dictionary of items. So here, let's call this itemDB. We'll place it on the main camera. Let's open that in Visual Studio. And let's take a look at how we would traditionally create this. So here we would have, say, a public list of type item. And then we would basically call this database equals a new list of type item. Now with this, we can populate that list and we can populate it with items. So here, if we let Unity compile, we can basically say database, and I can populate it with, say, 50 items. Now with this, I can create my items, and that's all fine and dandy, right? We can have a sword, and I could have some bread here. So here we have 2 items. Now with a list, if I wanted to check for these items or filter through them, I have to use a for each loop, and I have to filter through each of these objects. With a dictionary, I can assign a key to each of these objects, and I can efficiently and very quickly retrieve that object. So that's where key value pairs come into play. Dictionaries literally allow me to associate some sort of key with an item, and then I can, just by using that key, retrieve that item. So let's take a look at how we declare a dictionary. A dictionary uses the same namespace, system.collections.generic, as a list, and then to declare it, we say public dictionary. And you'll see here that if we look at the syntax, it says public dictionary, T brackets, very similar to a list, and it says T key and T value. These are generic types. What that means is I can define what is my key. So what I can put here is I can say I'm going to associate for items, I'm going to associate the item ID with it. So here we can say the key is going to be an int value, and that's how you want to associate that object. And then here, the value that it's going to be associated to is going to be of type item. So for example, I can say here that the key is 0, and that's always going to be mapped to item 0. 1 is going to be mapped to item 1, and 2 is going to be mapped to item 2, and I can use that as the IDs basically. So here we have public dictionary int item, and then every dictionary, every variable needs a name, and let's call this item dictionary. Okay, so with the item dictionary equals a new dictionary, and you initialize it very similar to a list. A new dictionary with a key of int and a value of item. So what we can do here is use that key int and associate it to an item. So let's take a look at how we populate this. One of the things you'll know here is in the editor, dictionaries do not display out of the box. You can make them display using a custom inspector, but out of the box they don't display. So how do we work with this? Well, what we need to do here is we need to add items to this dictionary, very similar to how we add items to a list. So to do this in tandem, I'm going to create our list again. I'm going to say public list, and let's go ahead here and declare an item list. And here we're going to say item list, and we'll compare these side by side. So they're very similar. The only difference here, though, is that I can quickly retrieve the item by its key. So how do we populate both of these? If I go into void start, to populate a list, I say item list.add, and then I can add a new item, just like that. Well, to add an item to a dictionary, basically I can go to item dictionary, and you'll see here that there's an add method as well. Now with the add method though, you'll see here that the parameters are key and value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to associate item ID 0, which is our key, with, let's say, the first item. So item, and if we wanted to define that item, we could before we added it. So what I would do here is I would say, let's create a sword. Sword equals a new item. Once I've created that sword, I could say sword.name equals sword. And then here, sword.id equals 0. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say the index could be 0, or I could even say sword.id for the key. But ideally, you should just use 0 and increment it from there. And then the item that I want to associate 0 with is going to be the sword. So I've just added that sword to our item dictionary. And if I wanted to add the sword to the list dictionary, I could say item list.add and do the same thing, sword. The difference here, though, is that, once again, there's no way for me to quickly retrieve the sword. I have to filter through all of them and find the sword, whereas the item dictionary, I can use this key and instantly get the sword. So that's how we add the dictionaries. Now, how do we actually use them? Now that we've added something to the dictionary, how can I print out what's in it? Well, the way you can retrieve it, if we know that there's only one value, is we can come down here and we can say item dictionary, and you access it the same way you do a list. And you'll see here that when I open up a subclass here, or a square bracket, it's looking for a key. So item dictionary, if I put in a 0 here, it's going to give me the item. You'll see here at the left, bottom left here, it says item dictionary. This means that it's going to return an item. So item dictionary sub 0, that's the key, that's going to be the sword. So what I can do is store that in a value called item. So let's create here item, and we can call this item, or I can say var item equals item dictionary key. And by doing that, I can now access item.id and item.name. So I now have access to whatever item is associated by that key. So that's how you access this. In the next video, we're going to take a look at looping through a dictionary.